So if software has to accommodate change, we need a methodology that can actually do that. So we already sort of stated Brooks's law, adding manpower to a late software project can make it later. I will now propose Perez's law after Shimon Peres, who's a former prime minister of Israel. He was a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize in the 1990s. And referring to some of the conflicts then going on in that part of the world, he is attributed to have said, if a problem has no solution, it may not be a problem, but a fact, not to be solved, but to be coped with over time. So if we sort of take inspiration from that, change in the software world is not a problem to solve, it's a fact of life. The fact that software can change is one of the things that makes it so powerful and can make it have such a long lifetime. So what we need is not a methodology that tries to solve change by having the plan is the truth, but one that accommodates change and realizes that change is always going to happen, and that's not bad. Change doesn't mean you were stupid the first time. It means that you need to evolve to make the software do more or do differently than what you originally thought, and that's not bad. So the response to all that ultimately in the early 2000s was sort of a position paper called the Agile Manifesto. And this was Kent Beck and a group of other developers. Sort of, if you think of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the door of the church and starting the Reformation in 1517, this is the software Reformation in some sense. And they said, we're uncovering better ways to develop software by doing it and helping others do it. And through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation or a comprehensive plan, if you will, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So if the customer said they want X and now they're changing their minds, don't think of it as, oh, the customer has broken their contract. Think of it as, we're building something new together. Sometimes you're not going to get the first guess exactly right, and you should be working with the customer, not fighting them on this. And responding to change over following a plan. So rather than saying the plan is the truth, we're saying change and evolution is the truth. And that doesn't mean that all of the things on the right are unimportant, but it means the things on the left are relatively more important. So this is kind of the embodiment of change is a fact to be coped with rather than a problem to be solved. So how does this compare to plan and document, the sort of family of methodologies where really the planning and documentation comes first? Obviously, the most important thing is continuous improvement, right? If change is a fact of life, the reason to change things is to make them better, to fix bugs or to make the functionality work better because you've now thought of a better way that the user experience could go. So all of the Agile methodologies have in common that the developers are continuously working on some kind of prototype that's partially working. So you have some subset of features that's always ready for the customer to try out, and the customers are involved on a continuous basis. The typical measure of progress is something like an iteration. There's no fixed value for that, but a week or two is sort of a typical amount of time. And that's the sort of clock at which the customer checks in and looks at the latest version that has a little bit more working. And the idea is really simple. It's like the longer you go without checking in with a customer, the greater your chances that you're investing effort in something that the customer might not be satisfied with. So in some sense, it's a way of having the customer continuously involved. And that means that we don't throw out the stuff in the plan and document methodology. For example, we don't throw out the idea that you have to get requirements from the end user of what the software has to do, but we substitute it with a lighter weight version because instead of sort of doing it once and that's it for the lifetime of the project, now you have a chance to do it every iteration. So instead of, for example, a long document that is an exhaustive list of requirements, you focus on doing what are called user stories for just a subset of requirements that you're working on during this iteration. And that's lightweight enough that you and the customer can sort of rapidly come to agreement on it. And then the development team can go off and in another iteration, the customer comes back and the progress that you've made can be measured against what they said last week, right? So basically everybody's on the same page about what the need for evolution and the need for change would be. Now, when this came out in 2001, it was very controversial. There was a column in IEEE Computer, an influential trade journal, and a software engineer named David Ratkin wrote in an opinion piece that the Agile, quote-unquote, methodology is just another attempt to undermine the discipline of software engineering. It's a way to legitimize hacker behavior. Them's fighting words. But guess what? By about 2012, just a little more than 10 years later, a major study of about 65 projects found the majority, even in large established software companies, were now using some version of Agile methodology. So it's no longer controversial. I think it's fair to say that for a lot of modern companies, this is sort of how software is built. Extreme programming, which is probably closest to the methodology we're going to try to help you learn in this course, is basically a way of saying, let's take all of those Agile ideas to an extreme. So if short iterations with a customer are good, make them as short as possible, like a week or a couple of weeks, not months or years. If simplicity is good, and surely we all believe that it is, then you should design the simplest thing that could possibly work. Now, this is actually pretty profound because if you're doing an entire system design up front before you begin any development, you're going to try to design for a lot of cases that are not going to be implemented for months. This says design for the cases that you're working on now and evolve the design later if you need to change the functionality, because guess what? Change is a fact of life. Right? Once you embrace change, it actually liberates you to simplify a lot of other things. If testing is good, and surely we believe that it is, then you should test all the time. In fact, the extreme version is instead of writing code and then writing tests, write the tests first, because that gives you a concrete sort of embodiment of what the code is supposed to do. Then write the code and make it so that it passes the test. That's called test-driven development, and it's one of the ideas that we're going to cover in the class. If code reviews are good, people looking at each other's code and commenting, and surely that's good because more eyeballs on the same code will find more opportunities for improvement, then we should be doing code reviews all the time. In fact, if you program in pairs, then one person can essentially be doing reviews as the other person is typing, and they switch roles every little bit. And in fact, when we talk about proper uses of GitHub in a team management situation, one of the real values of a GitHub pull request is that it is an opportunity to do a mini code review anytime that new code is going to be rolled into the main code branch. So basically all of the ideas of embracing change, but taken to an extreme position. Having said that, this doesn't mean that Agile is always the best methodology for a software project. And there's a checklist that is actually a pretty good way to suggest which methodology is better for a software project. Basically, you look at questions like, is a detailed spec required? Is the customer unavailable? So, you'd like to check in with them, but maybe for whatever reason, the customer is not available on a regular basis, or the system is very large and complex. Basically, each one of these questions that has a yes answer leans towards you should use one of the more plan and document-centric methodologies. The questions that have a no answer invite you to consider whether an Agile methodology would work. And so you go through the checklist and you see, which side the balance falls on. And that's really our main concern in this class, is not to say Agile is the way to do things. Agile is a good fit for a lot of things, but what we really care about is for you to be able to identify when it's the right thing to do and to have the wisdom to back off and say, you know what, this is a project where maybe Agile is not the best fit.